Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I'm not in my normal spot. Okay, I am in my normal spot, but if I wasn't in my normal spot, it's because I want to make sure I'm podcasting from ideal conditions to give myself the best possibility of doing a podcast without the interference of outside factors, which are present in plenty of other podcasts. So that's where I am and why I'm here. Tony, how are you?
Tom, I am fine. Of all of your many, many annoying traits, your passive aggressiveness is one of my least favorites, Tom. The tone that you're already taking on this show when people don't even know why you have that tone. So I guess we should. Do you suspect they know? So on Wednesday, Gene Smith met with the media just to provide it's been a while since he's talked, and so every now and again he'll stop by and answer a bunch of questions. And today he talked for an hour just answering questions. And the biggest thing to come out of this that people seem to have latched on, the people like Tom, the glommers, as I like to call you guys, have glommed on to something that Gene Smith said in talking about playoff expansion. He does believe 12 teams will eventually happen. When asked by the Lanterns' Jacob Benge about playing at home, Gene suggested he said his preference would probably be to play in Indianapolis, depending on how late in the year the playoff game would take place, rather, Tom, than playing in Ohio Stadium, which has a hard field in the winter. That the crowd, they might be cold. The quarterback would certainly be cold, so he would prefer to have that playoff game played in a dome in Indianapolis, a mere 3 hours from campus.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I can sort of see the argument, but also that seems like complete lunacy to me, because my immediate follow-up question would have been, hey, Are the teams in the South also going to have to give up their home games? And our buddy Pat Murphy saw me tweet that question and asked the question, and the answer was no, they would not. So if Ohio State plays a first-round playoff game against Georgia, again, it is a game that is Georgia's hosting, they would play it on campus at Sanford Stadium with 90,000 or 100,000 or whatever the number Georgia fans there. If they play a home game against Georgia in the first round, they would do it quite possibly, this is not a final thing, but quite possibly in Indianapolis with 70,000 fans, 3 hours from home. Are we not concerned about rain or wind in Georgia? I mean, that seems like that also might impact the conditions of the game. So why would you give that up? I mean, like, he was saying the words, and I said, the field could be hard, I guess, yes. And then I looked up what's the average high temperature on, say, December 10th in Columbus, Ohio, and it's like 42 degrees. And think back to times you might have taken your kids to Lights at the Zoo the second or third weekend in Columbus, Ohio, and it's like 50 degrees half the time. Like, this is not, you're not playing in Nome, Alaska. This is, Gene Smith said you're below the snow belt. If this game is on January 15th, sure, we can have that conversation, but mid-December seems like we're maybe looking for a problem that isn't really there. And he did say, this is sort of dependent on the date, and if the playoff games are earlier in December, then, it probably isn't as much of an issue. But I mean, if we want to have this conversation about Madison, Wisconsin, or Minneapolis, like, okay, maybe I can kind of squint and see it, but I mean, this seems like a solution in search of a problem, honestly.
Yeah, and he was discussing the need for flexibility, but this really didn't surprise me because there was talk a while back about just nixing on-campus playoff games anyway. So it feels like there's this. You wonder if there are people in the North who say, well, if we're not going to, if we don't feel that playing on our campus is really to our benefit, because obviously you're looking to move it rather than to play on campus, then why not nix all campus games? Like, if you can't have that benefit, you shouldn't allow the South to have that benefit. And I wonder if there was this, because remember we talked a while back about how it seems like the on-campus playoff games were trending away. And I wonder if that's because the North didn't see it as the advantage that the South does. But then also recently, Gene Smith said today, like recently they were able to figure out that they can grab domes. Like domes could be set aside for them, or they can just go and move those and consider those home sites. So maybe that will bring back the idea, the possibility of on campus playoff games, but only for the one side. Maybe for the West side as well, assuming there's ever playoff games out West or, in Texas and things like that. But I understand the desire for ideal conditions. I think all championship games should be played in ideal conditions. You can have as close to, there are no ideal conditions in November almost in the Big Ten, but you get used to it. And really, I'm with you, like, depending on when this stuff is, if it's, you almost have like a window of a couple of weeks before January hits. And sometimes that third Saturday in December might be too far. Generally, it isn't, though, because what was it on Christmas this year? Was it, in the 50s? Was it 60? And granted, that's not going to happen every year. I think that first game, whether it is the second Saturday or the third, I think you're going to be okay. And if it's looking like you'll know if there's a big Arctic burst coming down within a week, like how much time do they need to know? Like, can they get the deposit back on Lucas Oil if they're going to play in Ohio Stadium? Like, how much time do you need to know?
Yeah, I doubt they can just kind of like have a plan B thing. I think this is going to be, they're going to make the decision and the decision is going to be made, and it's not going to be, well, if it's a 70% chance of snow, then it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be, I think they're going to make this decision and they're going to, and this for all the world feels to me like you're being sort of told, like, when a celebrity dies and they're like, well, grave condition, and it's like, okay, this person's dead already, and they're just sort of soft pedaling this to sort of prepare us for the news that we don't want to hear. That's how that tracked to me today. Like, well, this decision's pretty much already been made, and we're just sort of being told, like, well, this is something we're considering. I don't understand why rain in Tuscaloosa, which does happen sometimes, or rain in Athens, Georgia, or I don't know. It gets cold in Norman, Oklahoma in December. So does Oklahoma not get to host playoff games? And what if it's windy in Clemson? Like, do they get to host playoff games? Because those wouldn't be ideal conditions. It just seems to me like we're defining ideal conditions in one very narrow way, which is, what if it's cold? And okay, when we were out at the Fiesta Bowl 3 years ago now, I remember the field was very wet and slick. I would not consider those conditions ideal. So, well, are we not going to play games at the Fiesta Bowl anymore because, the stadium in Glendale is, the field's slippery and everyone slips and falls, and that really impacts the comp. Just like, we're defining this in a very Southern way. Like, this just feels like the conferences have gotten together and the Southern teams have said, we're not going to go play in Columbus, Ohio. That's cold. We'll play in Indianapolis, which is just like, well, we're just getting on a plane and going somewhere else and playing in a place that's just like the places here. But we can play because it's not cold here. So that's, as long as it's not cold, it's ideal. It's like, well, no, that's not what that means. It has rained on the Orange Bowl before. It has, it has rained, the Rose Bowl is pretty close to ideal conditions most years. And, so, okay, you want to play at the Rose Bowl, that's fine. But, the bad weather happens a lot of places rather famously. So, this just seems very much like a weird thing to plant your flag on and just immediately kill. I think one of the things that people were maybe most excited to see about the first round of the playoffs, which is, great, let's see Alabama come up and go play in Ann Arbor. Let's see Georgia go play in Columbus. Let's see Texas A&M have to go to Madison. Like, you're somehow we're completely okay to play the Ohio State Michigan game in Columbus on November 30th, but 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, this is just like beyond the pale. And well, I mean, we can't do that. I mean, obviously, we'd need ideal conditions. Like, what? Are you going to put a dome over Ohio Stadium all the time because it rains there sometimes? Like, just I truly don't understand why this is something that the Big Ten would seemingly be so willing to punt on so early in this process.
And it just sanitizes and takes some of the excitement out of it, which is why I would almost, again, if the North can't have it or chooses not to have it, I'd almost rather see it scrapped. But I don't want to see all of these neutral site, and maybe it's not neutral site, but off-site games. I'd like to see some campus playoff games. I think that's what we all want. And if the Big Ten doesn't want that, then it's almost, you don't deserve it. It's like, if you want to shoot yourself in the foot, go ahead. Nobody else should have to shoot themselves in the foot. And regarding like the, like how much time do you need? You're going to sell these tickets, and what are you going to side with? Like you're probably going to, we have to think of the worst case scenario. So we better just go ahead and sell them for Lucas Oil, because would there be, you'd have to have like corresponding seats in Ohio Stadium like this. If the game is here, yeah, and it's not, well, then you're going to have to book hotels in Columbus, and you're going to have to book hotels in Indianapolis. So there, you've got this built-in excuse. Well, just, logistically, it's not you can't do that to fans. You got to think about the fans when you do this. And it's like, well, but what about the fans who would rather have the game in Columbus? Well, you can't just think about the fans. You also have to think about the players. Like, well, wouldn't the players rather play at home? Look, we're playing in Indianapolis, and if you don't like it, you don't have to go. And good news is 35,000 of you won't be able to go, because this venue is going to be smaller. So that settles that problem.
This feels like a solution in search of a problem. Like, the field might be hard. Like, okay, I mean, the field could be hard 3 weeks earlier when they play Michigan. Someone has to go play in Minneapolis at the end of November. Someone has to go play in Madison at the end of November. Like, this is not like unprecedented Big Ten country that you might have to play football when it's going to be cold and or snowing. Ohio State played in Minnesota in 2014, and it was like 15 degrees at game time. Like, no one died. Like, yeah, maybe it got hurt. Maybe it hurt a little more when you got tackled. But I mean, like, that was 14 degrees. How often has it 14 degrees in Columbus, Ohio, at any point in early to mid-December? Again, like, if this is January 15th and we're having this conversation, like, okay, I kind of get it. Like, December 11th, December 17th, whatever it's going to be, like, it's just not that cold here. It's just, that is just not that big a deal. And, I kept wondering, was the game in Ann Arbor last year, did the fact that it was snowy and they didn't look quite as, is that something that sort of, that's front and center in Gene Smith's mind, and that's what he's concerned about? Like, I mean, okay, but what do you think? I mean, go back and watch the Wisconsin-Miami Pinstripe Bowl, where the Miami players were basically like on the sidelines, like huddled around heaters and just like waving white flags, like, please let us leave. Like, why would you give up the opportunity to have that kind of a home field advantage? That seems, the whole point of this is it's the college football playoff. You're supposed to want to win the college. This is literally the thing that you're playing the sport for. Tony, do you know how much home field advantage is worth in college football?
3 points.
3 points. Okay, so why are you giving the other team 3 points by moving to a neutral site? And it's not a neutral site. It's a, like, I mean, I feel like it kind of is a neutral site if it's not your home stadium. So even if you have more fans there, but I just, why would you, in the games that matter the most, give up a 3 points worth of advantage? That makes no sense to me. None.
And really, I'd consider Ohio Stadium more of a 7 to 10 point advantage than a 3 point advantage, because a Tulsa home game is a 3 point advantage for Tulsa. Like, I think it's more for the bigger programs and the bigger schools in a lot of instances. Now, I will say you mentioned the Miami-Wisconsin game. Let's not go lightly over there. 7 Hurricanes died that day playing that game. Nobody wants to see that happen again. I looked. Do you know what the temperature was for the third Saturday in December this past year? Which is when you would suspect like the first round would be possibly.
I'm trying to remember which Saturday we went to the Columbus Zoo for Lights of the Zoo. That might have been the day, but I seem to remember it being like 40 degrees or so, give or take.
Yeah, it was 51 was the high.
Yeah, 51. Wow. Did anyone die from frostbite?
Yes, Tom. 17 people.
Wow.
Yes, thank you due to exposure at the zoo. Thank you, Tom, for bringing that one up again. Jeez.
How many of them were Miami football players? Thanks. I'll take my answer off.
17. I told them not to go to the zoo that day, but they just had to do it. And Gene did specifically say, like, I want CJ to have the best conditions. Like he mentioned CJ Stroud as one of his reasons and reasoning. And I completely understand that. Tom, is that kind of a backhanded way of saying, yeah, I don't know if this team really plays well at the cold, and I don't know if this is a cold weather team, and is that a backhanded way of saying this is a finesse team? And has he confirmed a lot of suspicions that the Ohio State fans have right now?
Well, I mean, yes, it is harder to throw the football when it is cold. It is harder to throw the football when it is cold and windy, yes. I mean, CJ Stroud is presumably harboring some hopes of playing in the NFL, and multiple, in fact, NFL teams do play in places where it snows sometimes, and do play home games in places where it snows sometimes in January. I mean, I'm sure he's not going to get drafted by Buffalo because they seem to have a quarterback, but there are places. Cleveland, rather famously, could be in the market for a quarterback at some point in the next year or two. Rather famously plays in a place that is cold and snows sometimes, and I mean, theoretically could be playing games in the month of January at some point as well. So, you just, as much as the cold weather is going to impact a northern team, which it will. I mean, we have talked over the years about the fact that passing numbers will sometimes kind of trend down as the weather gets worse going into the Big Ten season. Who's going to affect more? Like, yeah, you would prefer to have CJ Stroud on a fast, dry track. Sure. Who do you think it's going to impact more, CJ Stroud or Bryce Young? I mean, they're both Southern California kids, but I have a sneaking suspicion that if it really came down to it, it might impact. And think about the Texas A&M players, how cold the change in their pockets is going to get. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider. Was that a transition to NIL talk? Listen, who's to say? Tony, I don't know.
Well, I did want to add, and I'll just give you the actual quote from Gene. I would want CJ to have good weather. It's just that simple. I don't know if it's just that simple. I also, Tom, I do want a couple more minutes on this. I'm not sure how often Ohio State would necessarily be in a position to even host a game. If we're talking about the top four teams getting byes, and then the middle four teams getting to host games, Ohio State would have to be somewhere between 5 and 8, which they have been in the past.
I was going to say would be probably 2013, 2015, 2017, 2018. I mean,
and you're hosting teams that, I don't want to say this callously, like, you should need ideal conditions to beat the team that you would actually be hosting. Like you'd be hosting, if you're the fifth team, you're hosting the 12th team. So you should be able to beat Memphis if it's a little chilly, and even if you're the 8th team hosting the 9th team, like this is what you've been doing all season long. And if it's a little bit colder now, you should have been preparing. You've been preparing for this. How many times have we gone to Michigan State and it's freaking cold, and it's, and sometimes those aren't noon games necessarily. They're 3:30, and then it's dark out by the time we get, out of there, and you're walking over ice. They're removing a tarp covered with ice. And so I don't know that I think it would be, I'm with you, Tom, that you're not going to be playing Alabama or Georgia probably ever in Ohio Stadium, because both of those teams, one would have to be in the middle 8, and the SEC team would have to be in the bottom 8. Now, you could maybe get a Tennessee there or an Ole Miss, but the Georgia or Alabama, that would be few and very far between, in my opinion.
Sure, and there's 12 teams, and let's say they're keeping. I mean, the formula for this is still a little vague, but the top the 5 teams get the auto bids, top 5 conference champions, and then there's one non-power team. So that means there's 6 spots open if it's a 12-team playoff. I mean, 3 or 4 of those, let's be realistic, 3 or 4 of those are probably going to SEC teams. So the odds are, even if it's not Georgia or Alabama in a given year, it's Texas A&M, it's LSU,
Texas,
it's Texas, it's Oklahoma, it's Florida. I mean, I don't think any of those people are going to be particularly thrilled to come north. And again, none of this is finalized yet. Gene Smith is not saying this is a done deal. Gene Smith talked about the fact that this is something that there's a lot of flexibility depending on where on the calendar this exactly falls. This might be indoor, might be outdoor. This just seems like, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? Like, how are we at the point where it's like, well, there might be a chance of bad weather, and therefore we have to change. Like, the thing that everyone has been looking forward to the most, the thing that would benefit your team the most. You don't have to be altruistic in literally everything you do. You can think of yourself. You can guess what? You're going to make more money if you have it at home, because you're going to sell more tickets. You can have all of your season ticket holders have the right to buy that game. You think that's going to incentivize people to buy season tickets? I would suspect that it would. I think you could probably charge quite a good bit of money if you sell those home game tickets in Columbus, and people don't have to travel to Indianapolis and buy, get a hotel room and all that. We don't have to do everything based around the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce. Like, Indianapolis is a lovely place, and I enjoy when I visit there, but home games are more fun in a lot of ways, probably for fans and all of that. And so, we get to see teams play neutral site interconference games all the time. Like, what are the cool games? What are the cool games that you remember? They are the teams from other conferences coming for big interconference matchups on your campuses. Like, playing a neutral site game against TCU a couple of years ago was just like, oh, good, Jerry World again. Like, instead of going to Amon G. Carter Stadium, like, that would have been a cool place to see a game. Did we get to see it? Nope. Let's go to, I mean, they have figured this out. They're doing home and homes with Alabama. They're doing home and homes with Georgia in coming years. Like, we all know that this is what people want. Just give people what they want. You don't need to come up with a reason to not do that.
Gene is more interested in what is best for Ohio State, though. Best for the Ohio State offense, and that is ideal conditions. Tom, you are always talking about the SEC doing whatever it takes to get teams into the championship, being beneficial towards scheduling and things like that. And the Big Ten does not do that. Gene, me being a Gene apologist right now, thank you for that, Tom, is trying to give Ohio State their best shot at going further into playoffs by suggesting this. He doesn't want Ohio State to lose because of weather. And the one place where there is no weather, Tom, as we know, is in the Dome. So he's just trying to secure the best footing, the best situation. And while I believe that is a good idea, what you have to do to get to that situation is obviously the problem. And you take the game away from where the fans want to see it, out of Ohio Stadium. And there's obviously, this is college football. This should be played in college stadiums, but that went out the window a long time ago with bowl games and things like that. And now he is concerned about he wants to play in ideal conditions. He wants to have Ohio State advance as far as possible into the playoffs. Whereas, Tom, it seems like you just want to see a bunch of people slipping and sliding in Ohio Stadium.
Yes, I want to be done with the season by mid-December, and I want everyone to have frostbite. Those are my two primary concerns here, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I get the idea of, well, you want CJ Stroud to have perfect conditions. Who's going to be more used to throwing in non-perfect /cold/windy conditions? Mm-hmm. CJ Stroud or Bryce Young or Stetson Bennett or Zach Calzada or whoever's whoever's quarterbacking LSU this year. But that answer also is Zach Calzada. Hello, transfer portal. So, who is going to be more accustomed to playing in cold and wind and therefore be more well-suited to deal with it? Have an offense perhaps that is more tailored to playing in cold and wind? Is it going to be the team from Columbus, Ohio? Or is it going to be Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams and USC? I would submit that it is probably Ohio State. And all you have to do is look at what happens to USC when they go travel to Washington State or Oregon State late in the year? The answer is nothing good. So if you are a team that plays in an area where you have that weather that can work to your benefit, let it work to your benefit. Like, people in Columbus, Ohio will be okay. No one will die sitting outside in 41 degrees on December 15th. Like, it will be just fine. And I know this because I have sat in many games at Ohio Stadium where it was a lot colder than that. And no one, somehow it's not an issue through the end of November, and then you flip the calendar to December. It's like, whoa. This is a bridge too far. I don't get it. And, none of this is done and, all that. But this just seems like, why are we even entertaining this conversation? It doesn't make a lick of sense to me.
Tom, again, I think you're way off base here. I had a Miami player die in my arms in a November Ohio State game. They were visiting just to see some family. Boom. Just like a popsicle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wonder, as you're talking, I'm thinking, I wonder what Ryan Day thinks. Like, what would his answer be to this? And of course, now his answer has to be what Gene's answer is.
Right.
I think that's where maybe he gets handcuffed a little bit there. But obviously, you want ideal conditions. That's what every coach wants. But you also, every coach wants to play at home. And so, like, which of these do you side with? Probably the one that the athletic director is also siding with. So, Tom, should we then now transition to RIP the Alliance, our once great alliance between the Pac-12, the Big Ten, and the ACC? Did we just talk earlier this week about the alliance and how the Big Ten could just go down to 8 conference games, plug in a Big 12 or big Pac-12 or an ACC team for that 9th game, and then Gene Smith said today, like, really everybody's pretty much in favor of 9 conference games in the Big Ten, just about everybody. So they're not even, they've shelved that whole scheduling thing, and they're just pretty much going to stick with 9 games. He's not saying the scheduling alliance is dead, but it's, I don't think it's breathing anymore. And so they're just going to stick with the 9 conference games, do what they want. And I think one of the things that I kind of got from this is he doesn't want the alliance dictating to him as to who Ohio State will be playing, and it sounded like maybe there would have been some of that going on. Also, I thought it was interesting when Gene said the Big Ten is can do more for the Pac-12 and the ACC than either of those conferences can do for the Big Ten, and it's like, all right. And that was right after he said, we don't look at the SEC. We don't compare ourselves to the SEC because we handle more sports than they do. They're just a little pissant conference that does, averages 19 sports. And, we've got all of our teams are in the 30s. And so it's just really different worlds. We don't wake up in the morning thinking about the SEC, but the Alliance, as we knew it, Tom, this is the second failed attempt to get games scheduled with the Pac-12 in a formal fashion, conference-wide. And I think you shouldn't try it anymore, I guess, at this point, because it just not work. It doesn't work.
Well, yeah, it's interesting that this has flopped so spectacularly a second time. This is very much the same kind of thought that I had on the scheduling, neutral site playoff games. Like, what did this benefit the Big Ten to do? I mean, like, yeah, you had 3 teams sticking together again in the college football playoff conversation, I guess, so you weren't going to get steamrolled on that. Other than that, like, the Big Ten is the big shining mansion on the hill. The Pac-12 is, they're like solidly middle class, and the ACC is, their house is underwater with a mortgage that doesn't go, doesn't end until 2035. Like, why are you tethering yourselves to these people who are not nearly in as good a spot as you are, and who you could steal their best assets very easily because you could offer them a lot more than you could? Why would you tether yourself to them? And that never made sense to me. And the fact that, the alliance was, so what does the contract look like? I said, well, there's not actually a contract, but we smiled and we patted each other on the back quite a bit. Well, not literally because we met over Zoom, but I mean, like we I tried to reach around my computer monitor to pat, and like, it was like,
emojis.
So yeah, what is this exactly? It was like, well, it's more of a state of mind than a true technical deal per se. Yeah, this sounds like, okay. So that was a fun conversation. That was a fun news cycle for everyone to go, what is this doing again? And then the answer was, oh, nothing. Okay, cool, good. Well, I kind of disagree with the idea that they're better off playing 9 conference games. I mean, as we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever we did the show, in college football, you are better off having more data points cross-conference to actually be able to legitimately compare teams cross-conference. So it's not just, well, we just played all these teams in our conference and we played 3 garbage teams. I mean, this is the Michigan thing this year. Like, Michigan's going to go 10-2 and they're going to play a bunch of Big Ten teams and they're going to play no one out of conference. How good is Michigan going to be? Well, they're going to be 10-2. Well, how good are they? Well, they're 10-2. Like, what does that mean? You don't know anything about stuff outside of the conference. How would they stack up against the similar team in the SEC? We don't know. How would they stack up against a similar team in the Pac-12? We don't know because they don't play anyone. You have these limited data sets where, yes, you're going to have Ohio State and Notre Dame, and yes, you're going to have Penn State and Auburn, but there's not that much you can legitimately compare teams with. More would be helpful in terms of making these college football playoff decisions, because you get to November and it's like, well, everybody knows that this team is better than that team. It's like, well, how do you know? It's like, well, I mean, everyone knows. It's like, well, yeah, but using what information? Well, everyone knows. Like, okay, that's not, you keep saying these words, you're just repeating them. You're not actually answering the question. More cross-conference data points would be helpful in terms of actually making an informed decision. But, this feels to me like, well, I guess the TV partners have decided that more conference games is better, more valuable property. So therefore, that's what they're going to do.
And if you're going to be moving to 12 teams, I don't know that you need as much accurate information from the cross-conference stuff, because if you get 9 through 12 wrong, yeah, I mean, is that, as long as you got 1 through 8 right, I think that's the more important thing. So I don't know how much you need Ohio State playing Oregon State or whatever. Granted, I would have liked to have seen it, but this is also leads us into our last point about Gene Smith being okay with getting rid of divisions. He'd like to see some models of it. He's not against it by any means. One of the things he said he did want is for athletes to be able to play every school in the Big Ten over their 4 years, and it's something that doesn't necessarily happen. And so if you go to the 8 games, that makes things even more difficult. But the lack of divisions, and you just like I would not be, Tom, I would not be broken up by not having to go to Rutgers every 2 years, not have to go to Maryland every 2 years, and instead get to go to beautiful West Lafayette or beautiful Champaign-Urbana, and just experience more cities and know that, oh man, this is a Maryland road trip year, isn't it? Yes, it is. It is what it is. But I'm sure the players have the same thing. Like, gosh, I would like to go to Nebraska 1 year. I would like to go to Wisconsin, like even Illinois, like wherever. And so this would be an opportunity to, just schedule these things. Like, Tom, remember what's his name? Richard Simmons, and he had to deal a meal. Mm-hmm. And you pull out some cards and you just deal like, here's my protein, here's my bread, and today I'm having a bologna sandwich. You can have the same with you can just deal a schedule out, and you can do it. This year, as we've talked about, you're in pods, you've got to have your protected whatever, but the schedules would be pretty vastly different from year to year, and I think that's enticing to me as well, and maybe into the TV people.
Yeah, you would think that would be a little more enticing, because and you would think that would be enticing to virtually everyone in the league, because outside of the teams in the East, and the teams in the East, I mean, theoretically, let's just do this with Ohio State's protected pod being Michigan, Michigan State, and Penn State. So here's the teams who that would hurt losing home games with Ohio State every other year: Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana. Because those are schools that Ohio State fills their stadium every other year. Those are 3 teams that would hurt. You know who would help? Literally everyone else in the conference, who would then have Ohio State fans filling their stands, filling their hotels, drinking their beer every other year or every 4 years. Like, everyone else wins in this scenario. Like, and that goes for Michigan fans, Penn State fans, Nebraska fans. Like, this is a thing where, the fact that Iowa's Scott Docterman was the one who kind of floated this report a couple weeks ago, which told me this is probably coming from the Iowa athletic department, which why would Iowa want that? Well, guess what? Iowa wants Ohio State to come. Iowa wants Penn State to come. Iowa wants Michigan to come. Because then you have all your hotels full. You have Iowa fills the stadium no matter what, but you're selling the tickets for more money. You are making your season ticket packages more desirable. That means you're bringing in more money overall. I mean, this is a very appealing thing for an Iowa to do. So, and it would be very appealing for Minnesota and Wisconsin and everyone else. So, yeah, that seems like something that, and frankly, like I'm sorry, like. Rutgers is lovely. I enjoy going home and getting the bagels and the Taylor ham and all that stuff. But like, man, we could do that every 4 years instead of every 2, and it would be just fine. Maryland, like, yeah, man, I don't. That stadium does nothing for me. That trip does nothing for me. Like, I mean, let's go do some other stuff. Let's go try some new places. Like, this is. The way this has worked, we haven't, let's see, I've been back on the beat since 2017. Since then, we haven't been to Illinois, Wisconsin. We haven't been to Iowa since 2017. Mm-hmm. We've been to Purdue once. We've been to Northwestern once. I mean, like, I would, no offense to College Park, I would rather be in Madison. Like, Madison is a lot more fun of a trip, and it's a much more interesting game because Ohio State's not going to win by 1 trillion points. So, Let's do that more. Can we do that more? Minneapolis was perfectly lovely. Let's do that in September again. Let's do or play it in the Dome. Either one is fine. That one I think totally makes sense. Play that one in the Dome. But yeah, other than that, yeah, I am all for spacing it out a little more. And because I mean we've talked about this in the context of the SEC before. You have teams where they only play 8 conference games. 6 of them are against teams in your division. 1 of them is a protected cross-division game. So you're rotating the other 6 teams in the other division once every 6 years, which means you only play a road game against them once every 12 years. Like that's not a conference opponent. That's not a conference schedule. That's just like, I mean, like casual acquaintances where you drive past and you wave at someone on the road, like as you're driving past them. That's not like being in the same neighborhood. That's just, well, this guy kind of lives close to me, and that's about it.
I'm all for it. Let's try something new. If every now and again you got to shake some stuff up, or else it starts to get a little bit boring, football wise. Tom, anything else before we get out of here?
No, I think we're good. We'll have I'm sure plenty more to talk about on this on many of these topics. We haven't even touched on the NIL stuff, which was pretty interesting as well. So we'll probably have more to talk about on coming shows, which is good because we do tend to do these podcasts every once in a while.
Yeah, and then also tomorrow we've got the final listener questions show from this last batch of questions dropping. So look for that in all of your podcast platforms, just like you found this one. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys tomorrow.